On August 8, 1919, a stroke of a pen formally recognized Afghanistan as a sovereign nation on the world stage. By signing the Treaty of Rawalpindi, the British Empire surrendered its control over Afghan foreign policy. Yet the ink on this treaty dried over a glaring contradiction. Just weeks earlier, British Handley Page night bombers were dropping high explosives directly onto the city of Kabul. To understand how a besieged nation extracts a diplomatic surrender of this scale, we have to look at the baseline. Before 1919, Afghanistan was an autonomous British protectorate. London dictated Afghan foreign policy to maintain a reliable buffer state between India and Tsarist Russia. That status quo shattered on May 3rd, when the newly crowned Emir Amanullah Khan ordered a military invasion across the Durand Line into British India, launching the Third Anglo-Afghan War. The offensive was a debilitating logistical failure. Within 30 days, the Afghan forces were routed and pushed back across their own border. An invading army is thoroughly crushed in a matter of weeks, yet manages to force the largest empire in human history to concede its primary diplomatic demands. This is the central paradox of asymmetrical statecraft. The domestic origins of the conflict were built inside the classrooms and printing houses of Kabul. To fight a modern war, the monarchy realized they needed a modern national identity. Amanullah's predecessor, Emir Habibullah, recognized that the country lacked the administrative infrastructure to govern effectively. In 1904, he founded Habibullah College. This diagram illustrates how the college operated as a state-sponsored funnel, intaking elite students to output a disciplined corps of civil administrators. These graduates formed the Roshan Fikran, or enlightened ones. Owing their education to the crown, they were deeply loyal. This group engineered a specific doctrine. They merged unwavering support for the king with modern patriotism and Islamic solidarity, packaging it into a single cohesive ideology. The architect of this doctrine was Mahmud Tarzi. After spending years in the Ottoman Empire absorbing reformist ideas, he returned to Kabul to champion the modernization of the state. Tarzi published the state-backed newspaper Siraj al-Akhbar, standardizing the nationalist message. However, this map highlights a structural flaw. Propaganda operated exclusively in Persian, isolating Kabul from the Pashto-speaking tribal borderlands. Print capitalism gave the Kabul elite the unified operating system required to imagine challenging the British. Yet this nationalism remained contained within the city limits. While Kabul was solidifying its internal doctrine, the British Empire was experiencing acute macro pressures. 4 years of global conflict in the First World War had exhausted British forces. Soldiers were demanding demobilization, and colonial garrisons faced near mutinous conditions. The immediate trigger for action occurred in April 1919. British troops fired into an unarmed crowd in Amritsar, India, an event now marked by this memorial. Hundreds of civilians were killed in the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. Amanullah seized the opening. He publicly framed his impending invasion as an act of pan-Asian solidarity, aiming to aid Indian revolutionaries against colonial rule. But the instrument Amanullah wielded to strike this blow was brittle. The regular Afghan army was hampered by severe logistical shortages and a lack of transport animals. Its ranks were filled through the Hashtanafari conscription system, which mandated that 1 in 8 men serve for life. This created a resentful and unmotivated infantry. They also faced a technological deficit. The regular forces were largely equipped with obsolete Snider rifles, facing off against British troops carrying modern Lee Enfields. The actual combat capability lay with the frontier tribal auxiliaries. These irregular fighters were highly mobile and motivated, but they operated outside of state discipline. Amanullah's strategic calculation was simple. He had a hollow regular force and a volatile tribal militia. His only option was to strike a distracted giant quickly and hope the political shockwave outpaced his military shortcomings. On May 3rd, the Afghan offensive launched simultaneously across 3 distinct geographic fronts. Attack vectors moved from Torkham toward Peshawar, from coast toward Kurram, and from Kandahar targeting Chaman. Initially, the geography worked to their advantage. At Torkham, General Saleh Muhammad's forces navigated the rugged terrain to lay siege to the British base at Landi Kotal. On the second front, General Nader Shah utilized unmarked mountain passes to surround the British fort of Thal. Then, the British deployed a countermeasure that completely bypassed the mountainous choke points. The Royal Air Force, operating at an altitude of 10,000 feet. RAF planes strafed Afghan supply lines and scattered the infantry with heavy machine gun fire. The air campaign escalated. In a single day, British bombers dropped nearly 2 tons of explosives onto the city of Jalalabad. This was followed by a strategic decapitation strike. A Handley Page bomber reached the capital and targeted Amanullah's palace. Confronting a weapon system they had no defense against, Afghan morale collapsed. Both the regular forces and the tribal auxiliaries abandoned their positions and retreated back across the border. By early June, the failed offensive left Amanullah with no choice but to request an armistice. The introduction of aerial warfare erased Afghanistan's historic geographic advantages. It exposed the mathematical limits of a pre-industrial military attempting to fight a mechanized empire. This brings us back to the paradox. If Amanullah's military was routed in 30 days, why did the British Empire concede his demand for diplomatic independence? The answer lies in the arithmetic of imperial logistics. To enforce their control over Afghan foreign policy, the British would have had to mount a massive ground occupation. They did not have the manpower. The British were struggling to contain mounting rebellions in India and managing severe domestic war weariness. London calculated a strategic compromise. They traded away their oversight of Afghan diplomacy in exchange for a guarantee that Afghanistan would remain a stable, anti-Soviet buffer state. Against the odds, Amanullah secured his objective. He placed an independent Afghanistan on the modern global map, a victory physically commemorated by the Arch of Victory and Pagman. But winning the peace created an internal crisis of legitimacy. Amanullah used the 1919 settlement as proof of a mandate to launch a radical modernization agenda, modeled on the reforms in Turkey. This agenda was written in the language of the urban Roshenfekran. The rural tribal forces who had actually fought the British saw these secular reforms as an alien threat to their social order. By claiming a victory his military didn't win, Amanullah overplayed his hand. He had unified the state elite, but he had permanently alienated the tribal periphery, creating an ideological fracture that would trigger an internal war and collapse his monarchy within a decade.